For 500 years, Rome was the greatest empire on earth. Millions lived under its laws. Its roads connected continents. Its armies were unstoppable. But between 410 and 476 CE, it all fell apart. And most people get the story completely wrong. Rome's military was legendary. The legions, disciplined, organized, equipped with the best weapons of the ancient world. At their peak, around 450,000 soldiers protected the empire's 5,000-mile border. No enemy could challenge them, or so everyone thought. Behind the military was an economic system. Trade routes stretching from Britain to China. Cities full of merchants and craftsmen. A currency, the denarius, that was trusted across the known world. Rome's wealth paid for its armies, and Rome's armies protected its wealth. It was a perfectly balanced system. And holding it all together was the emperor, a single ruler backed by the Senate, commanding loyalty from governors, generals, and administrators across the empire. Political power was centralized. Decisions were made in Rome and carried out across thousands of miles of territory. It seemed unbreakable, but by the year 250 CE, cracks were beginning to show. Not obvious cracks, not visible from the outside. These were internal cracks, in the economy, in the military, in the politics. Cracks that no one noticed, until they did. Between 235 and 284 CE, Rome entered what historians call the 3rd century crisis. And it was exactly as bad as it sounds. 50 different men claimed the throne in just 50 years. The empire had no stable leadership. Every time someone became emperor, rivals immediately challenged him. Meanwhile, the economy was crashing. To pay for constant civil wars and border defense, emperors debased the currency. They literally reduced the silver content in coins. The denarius went from 50% silver down to just 5% by 270 CE. Prices skyrocketed. Inflation became rampant. On top of economic chaos came disaster. The plague of Cyprian struck around 250 CE. It killed millions. Some historians estimate it wiped out a quarter of Rome's population. Fewer people meant fewer soldiers, fewer taxpayers, less production. The empire was literally shrinking, and beyond Rome's borders, something was stirring. Germanic tribes, the Goths, Franks, Vandals, were gathering. Not because they hated Rome, but because they were being pushed by something else. The Huns, migrating from Central Asia, were moving westward, displacing everyone in their path. Rome needed soldiers. It desperately needed soldiers. So what did it do? It hired the barbarians. By the 4th century, Roman legions were increasingly composed of Germanic warriors, fighting under Roman commanders, using Roman weapons, but maintaining their own tribal allegiances. Rome was recruiting its own replacement. The debasement of currency created a vicious cycle. As the currency became worthless, people lost faith in it. Merchants demanded more coins for the same goods. Prices spiraled upward. By 300 CE, a measure of grain that cost 200 denarii in 200 CE now costs 30,000 denarii. That's inflation of 15,000%. With unstable currency and constant warfare, trade routes became dangerous. Merchants stopped traveling. Caravans were attacked. Trade networks that had connected the empire for centuries simply stopped working. Archaeological evidence shows ceramic trade markers, pottery containers that traveled thousands of miles, declining by 90%. Governments need taxes. Rome needed massive taxes to pay its armies and maintain its bureaucracy. But with inflation, economic chaos, and people losing faith in the system, tax collection collapsed. Provinces stopped paying. The money flowing to Rome dried up. And here's the critical problem. The military was paid from taxes. No taxes meant no payment. An unpaid army is a dangerous army. Soldiers demand their wages. If the emperor can't pay them, they revolt. By 350 CE, Rome couldn't afford to pay its own legions. Desperate emperors took desperate measures. They tried to control prices by force. They tried to force people into hereditary occupations. Your father was a baker, so you must be a baker. Nothing worked. The economy was in free fall, and it was dragging the entire empire down with it. While the economy was collapsing, the political system was tearing itself apart. Different generals, different regions, different political factions, all wanted to control Rome. Civil wars erupted. In some years, there were literally 3 different emperors, each claiming legitimacy, each fighting for power. When the emperor can't control his own territory, when generals ignore orders, when provincial governors act like independent warlords, central authority collapses. By the 4th century, Rome didn't have one emperor commanding the entire empire. It had the Eastern Roman Empire and the Western Roman Empire, increasingly separate powers. Corruption flourished in the chaos. Officials enriched themselves. Military leaders became warlords controlling their own territories. No unified government meant no unified standards, no accountability. Every region was becoming its own kingdom. The empire was breaking into pieces. Gaul developed its own imperial pretenders. Spain became independent. Africa, one of Rome's richest provinces, fell under the control of Vandal tribes. Rome could no longer enforce its authority. The eternal empire was visibly dying. The military, unpaid and increasingly composed of barbarian mercenaries, didn't serve Rome anymore. They served whoever paid them. Generals used their armies to seize power. Barbarian commanders rose to prominence. The line between Roman army and barbarian army became impossible to define. By 370 CE, the barbarian pressure wasn't just at the borders. It was breaking through. The Goths invaded the Balkans. The Franks crossed the Rhine. Barbarian tribes weren't asking permission to enter Rome anymore. They were taking what they wanted, and Rome was too weak to stop them. In 410 CE, Alaric the Goth led his army to Rome itself. The city that hadn't been conquered in 800 years was sacked. Buildings burned. Citizens were killed. The psychological impact was devastating. Rome wasn't invincible. Rome could fall. And if Rome could fall, nothing was permanent. After 410, the collapse accelerated. Once people saw that Rome could fall, that the emperor was powerless, confidence evaporated. Whole regions stopped resisting. Tax collection became impossible. The military dissolved. Each region looked to its own defense. The unified empire was dissolving. Archaeological evidence shows a stark pattern. Around 400 to 420 CE, cities across the Western Roman Empire were abandoned. Not all at once, but over a generation, people left. They moved to rural areas, seeking safety. They built fortifications around their villages. Urban civilization was collapsing. The trade networks that had defined Rome for centuries simply stopped. No caravans, no ships. Archaeological records show almost no long-distance trade in Western Europe after 420 CE. Communities became isolated, self-sufficient local villages. The connected world that Rome had built was broken. What followed is called the Dark Ages. Not because nothing happened. Plenty happened. But because it was dark. Cities had disappeared. Trade had vanished. The sophisticated civilization that Rome built seemed to evaporate almost overnight. In its place, poverty, isolation, and a return to subsistence living. One of Rome's greatest achievements was preserved knowledge. But much of it was lost. Libraries burned. Manuscripts decayed. The techniques for building Roman roads, Roman aqueducts, Roman buildings, largely forgotten. It would take 1,000 years for Europe to rebuild this knowledge. The literacy rate in Western Europe plummeted. In the Roman period, significant portions of the population could read and write. But as Roman institutions collapsed, literacy became rare. By the early medieval period, even many nobles couldn't read. Knowledge was preserved only in monasteries by monks. Roman aqueducts fell into disrepair. Roads, once the greatest highway system in the world, became overgrown and impassable. Bridges collapsed. Without a central authority maintaining infrastructure, it all decayed. Medieval cities huddled around castles, not on the grand Roman roads anymore. But from the ruins of Rome, a new world emerged. Feudalism, the church as political authority. Germanic kingdoms in place of the empire. It wasn't Rome's world anymore. It was medieval Europe. And it would take 1,000 years of development before Europe again reached the level of sophistication Rome had achieved. So why did Rome fall? Not because of barbarians. Not because of one cause. Rome fell because of a perfect storm. Economic collapse, political chaos, military overextension, religious transformation, loss of will. All these factors converged at the same moment. No single solution could have fixed it. Rome's collapse is a warning about systemic fragility. Rome was the greatest civilization of its time. It seemed impossible that it could fall. But complex systems have hidden vulnerabilities. When multiple parts fail simultaneously, the whole system can collapse, faster than anyone expects. Today, we live in equally complex systems: global supply chains, financial networks, technological infrastructure. What happens if multiple parts fail at once? What if we face economic crisis, political polarization, infrastructure decay, and loss of shared values simultaneously? Could civilization collapse today like Rome did? Rome teaches us that civilization is fragile, more fragile than we like to admit. Prosperity isn't guaranteed. Order isn't inevitable. What seems permanent can collapse. The knowledge we build can be lost. The systems we create can fail. And recovery, once collapse begins, can take centuries. Rome's fall reminds us that we are not so different from the Romans. They thought their empire would last forever. They didn't see the collapse coming. Neither do we. But if we understand what happened to Rome, if we recognize the patterns, the systemic vulnerabilities, the cascading failures, maybe we can do better. Maybe we can build systems more resilient. Maybe we can learn from Rome's fall. Because the lesson is clear: civilizations are fragile, and the time to strengthen them is before they break.